A young woman was found naked, lying on sheets, stained with dark spots of dried blood and semen. There were fingerprints on her neck and belt marks on her wrists. The air smelled of cheap soap and sweat, as if someone had hastily washed their hands. On the nightstand was his business card, Doctor You Can Trust, February 10, 2001, Toronto, Ontario. A flight from Halifax landed at Pearson Airport. Among the passengers was 20-year-old Elisa Merwin, a second-year humanities student. Her suitcase was light, but her face was tired. She had been suffering from insomnia, anxiety attacks, and panic attacks for the past few months. After a protracted breakup with her boyfriend and persistent depression, a doctor at the university clinic recommended she see a private specialist. The doctor's name sounded like a guarantee of results, Daniel Roseman. The press called him a voice of confidence. He was often invited onto morning shows to speak about self-acceptance, self-love, and emotional honesty. Elisa booked an appointment in advance through a website that charged a steep fee, $380 per hour. She sold her laptop to pay for the first 3 sessions. Dr. Roseman's office was located downtown, on the second floor of an unmarked brick building. The office resembled a cozy apartment, a soft armchair, the scent of vanilla, subdued lighting, and a table stocked with coffee and chocolate in the corner. There was no secretary. He opened the door personally, smiling softly and lingeringly, almost hypnotically. February 13, 2001. The first session lasted almost 2 hours. According to the girl, as recorded in her personal diary, he looked at me as if he knew everything ahead of time. He began with simple questions about school, family, fears. Gradually, he moved on to more intimate topics: dreams, loneliness, her relationship with her father. He didn't take notes, but simply listened, sometimes repeating her phrases in the same tone, as if mirroring every word. Elisa later wrote, "He speaks in a way that makes me feel quiet inside. It seems as if I no longer need to think. He does everything for me." This technique, emotional mirroring, was widely used in his practice. He would imitate the client's timbre of voice, their breathing, and even their posture, creating a sense of perfect synchronicity. This created the feeling of the patient hearing themselves, but under the therapist's control. At the second meeting, he said, "Sometimes you don't trust the world because you weren't allowed to trust a man, and I'm here to fix that." From that day on, Ellis began emailing him in the evenings. He responded almost instantly, at length, in an unusually personal tone. "You're not a patient. You're the person I respect most. Let me guide you." February 20th, 2001. From the third session onward, he removed the chair she'd been sitting on, offering her a low sofa instead. In a conversation about her fear of loneliness, he said, "You don't have to be strong. Sometimes therapy is letting someone hold your hand." He paused, and she didn't pull away when he touched her wrist. Then he added, "If you feel like I'm replacing your pain, don't be afraid. This is a normal stage." He knew how human boundaries worked and how to erase them. His power was built not on aggression, but on gentleness. He instilled in her that openness is trust, and trust is the path to healing. In one letter he wrote, "You have no idea how important it is to allow a man to see you completely. Don't hide your thoughts or your body." A witness, his former patient, later told the investigator, "He did it the same way with everyone. First he was a god, then a friend, then someone you couldn't breathe without. When you realize he's not saving you, but breaking you, it's too late." Ellis began to depend on him psychologically. Her diary entries from late February are marked by instability. "He knows when I'm crying, even if I don't say it. Sometimes it feels like he's inside me." She stopped communicating with her friends and didn't answer her mother's calls. Every day began and ended with his letters. By March 2001, her mental state had deteriorated sharply. She complained of loss of appetite, headaches, and irritability. Yet, her correspondence with him was utterly submissive. "You said I shouldn't tell others how the therapy is going. I agree. People will ruin everything." Police later determined that it was during this period that Roseman began using hypnotherapy without written consent. He explained it as a method for reducing anxiety. In fact, it was after these sessions that patients reported partial memory lapses. On February 25th, 2001, during their fourth session, he first suggested she close her eyes and imagine a hand holding her from pain. Witnesses claimed this ritual was his way of establishing physical contact. The woman recalled in her diary that during the session, she felt his fingers touch her neck, then her shoulder. After that, she no longer doubted his right to touch. All these actions seemed harmless in the context of therapy, but there was a plan behind them. The psychologist understood that the young woman with an anxiety disorder was particularly sensitive to authority. He convinced her that she couldn't cope without him, that their relationship wasn't just a job, but a psychological union. He himself introduced this concept into their correspondence. Within 2 weeks, Ellis stopped calling him doctor and wrote to him by his first name. Phrases like, "I'm scared, but he says fear is love," appeared in her notes. By the time the investigation began, police had found more than 40 messages with women on his work computer, repeating the same communication style: gentle suggestion, a special connection, and a request not to share the content of the therapy with anyone. For the first few months, his influence was perceived as miraculous. He relieved women of anxiety, but in return, he made them dependent. Ellis Merwin became one of those who believed that trust could save them, and it was from this trust that her destruction began. After several weeks of sessions, the doctor already knew where the weak points in her consciousness were. Ellis arrived without makeup, spoke more quietly than before, and often apologized when she began to cry. The investigation notes noted the patient demonstrated signs of emotional dependence and compliance, characteristic of victims of psychological pressure. Dr. Roseman built rapport methodically. He removed professional jargon from his conversations and began to speak more simply, as if speaking with a close friend. He asked for not only thoughts, but also sensations, smells, bodily reactions, memories arising during therapy. His letters became increasingly personal, yet they still sounded scientifically sound. He called it the total transparency method. Gradually, the theme of fear gave way to pleasure. He instilled in her that shame is a disease and the body is an instrument of healing. Ellis wrote in her diary that during the sessions, she felt warm, as if she were dissolving. She could no longer separate therapy from the doctor's presence. He asked her to learn to let go and allow yourself to feel everything. Investigators later reconstructed some of his verbal statements from notes from other patients. In the records, these phrases are labeled as inductive suggestions. You're not sick, you're just too honest. If you want to be whole, stop resisting. Trust is when you are not afraid to become a means for someone else's peace. You don't have to think, I think, for both of us. With each session, he deepened her submission. Her brain adjusted to his rhythm, his even voice, his slow pauses, his identical gestures. He varied the distance between them, gradually shortening it. Once he asked her not to wear black because the color interferes with contact. Then he suggested she take off her shoes so the body can breathe better. Ellis began to confuse boundaries. She began justifying any of his requests, writing them down as part of the method. Her diary contains the words, "If he asks, it means he needs it. If I feel uncomfortable, it means I'm resisting the treatment." When her loved ones noticed the changes, she no longer perceived anxiety as a signal. She said she had passed the shame stage. She stopped responding to her parents altogether. A psychologist convinced her that external voices are hindering progress. He maintained an artificial sense of secrecy, saying that real change occurs only in closed spaces where there is no light. Building staff later revealed that the windows in his office were always curtained, even during the day. Ellis's inner boundaries vanished. He called her letters emotional reports, forcing her to describe her reactions to touch, breathing, and gaze. He didn't do it roughly, but rather as if caringly under the guise of testing her sensitivity. She perceived it as therapy. His handwriting remained impeccable. Neat letters, a calm tone, and medical explanations. Not a single letter contained any direct references to sex, only hints, psychological formulations, seemingly academic. But between the lines, a sense of control was visible. Don't turn away from what causes heat. Your body is not the enemy, but the door, and I am the one who holds the key. She wrote to him that she was afraid of this addiction, but he replied curtly, "Fear is a sign of honesty. If it hurts, then it's right." Ellis became an isolated figure. She stopped showing up at the university, and neighbors would see her returning late, with a tired face and red eyes. Police later recorded that in the 2 weeks before her death, she called only him. The pathologist's memo will state, traces of emotional and physical dependence were recorded at the behavioral level. The patient lived in a state of induced submissiveness. What began as treatment turned into a system of control, where therapy became a tool of subjugation. Ellis didn't understand that boundaries had completely disappeared. Dr. Roseman had gained not trust, but power that was impossible to relinquish. Gradually, his control became absolute. Ellis no longer saw therapy as help. It became a way of life, where every action required his confirmation. Mornings began with a short message. "Are you awake?" If she didn't respond within 10 minutes, another would follow. "I need to know you're in rhythm." He called it synchronization, but in reality, it was observation turned into habit. Her laptop, confiscated after her death, contained dozens of emails in which he gave her instructions on her regimen. Don't eat after 6. Anxiety lives in your stomach. Don't drink coffee. It makes your thoughts noisy. If you want to sleep, close your eyes and imagine I'm next to you. Otherwise, your body won't believe you can rest. He was replacing her own sensations. Now every feeling demanded her approval. Ellis began keeping a journal as he instructed. Every day she recorded mistakes, words, thoughts, gestures that, in his opinion, were hindering healing. The entries were full of self-criticism. "I doubted him again," which means there's still rot inside. He instilled in her that any resistance was a disease. The phone conversations, preserved in the operator's recordings, lasted for hours. His voice remained even, emotionless, but every word sounded like an order. "You think too much, Ellis. Thinking is a way to hide. If you want to be real, stop saying no. When you are silent, I feel that you are healthy." She stopped seeing friends and didn't answer her mother's calls. The investigation report states that in March she received 8 missed calls from her family and never returned a single one. He instilled in her that the past was poison and people from the past were its carriers. Any attempt at contact with the outside world was perceived as a violation of therapy. By mid-month, the control extended beyond the sessions. He imposed a schedule of sleep, eating, and behavior. He demanded she photograph her meals, note her wake-up time, and record her dreams. He called it a mindfulness journal. In reality, it was a report to him. Every evening, she wrote down how she behaved, what she felt, and how she responded to imaginary touches. He asserted power through language. He shifted the meanings of words. Submission became acceptance. Pain became process. In letters, he wrote, "If you feel like I'm taking away your air, it's not power, it's care. I'm simply helping you breathe properly." Ellis wrote, "He's always right. My brain is a source of errors. His is a source of meaning." Soon, even the smallest everyday details depended on his approval. She'd ask if she could go to the store, whether she should turn on the TV, what she should wear. He'd grant or deny them without explanation. Sometimes he'd stop responding for days, making her feel guilty. In one letter, she pleaded, "If I've done something wrong, tell me how to fix it." This was no longer treatment, but complete subjugation. Later, investigators would classify this as behavioral slavery, masquerading as therapy. Psychological experts would point out that such methods deprive a person of autonomy and erase the ability to self-esteem. Ellis began to react not to reality, but to his presence or absence. The last entries in her diary were short and mechanical. Woke up at 8:10, ate half an apple. I think he's happy. Dream. He says I'm ready. I don't know what for. By this point, he had stopped calling her by her name. In his correspondence, she appeared as an experimental unit. For him, she had become not a patient, but an object. And although his reports remained academic, there was no longer any therapy on the outside, only a person completely dependent on someone else's will. Investigators would later describe this state in a report with one sentence: the patient was in a state of forced emotional synchronization caused by manipulative control by the therapist. He achieved the ideal result: a man who thought his thoughts, breathed his breath, and ceased to exist on his own. On April 7, 2001, Elisa disappeared from the neighbor's view. Surveillance cameras in her home recorded her leaving at 2:12 p.m. with a small bag through a side entrance, locking the door behind her. Without a key, she never returned home. Her phone remained on until midnight that same day, after which the signal went out. It was later discovered that the previous day, she had received a text from Dr. Roseman instructing her to go into therapeutic seclusion. The Edison Motel, located on the outskirts of Toronto, was her final stop. Room number 18, booked under a false name, had been pre-selected. The front desk indicated that payment had been made by a man who left a contact number that matched the Psychologist's office line. Ellis arrived around 5 p.m. Security footage shows her acting calm, showing no anxiety, only glancing back at the entrance a few times. She was holding a pharmacy bottle containing pills, later identified as antidepressants, prescribed by another doctor. In the room where she was later found, there was little evidence of a struggle. A glass of water stood on the table, and Rosamond's business card, neatly placed on top of a notebook, was nearby. The notebook's final entry was a list of short points, dated that same day. Turn off the light, lie down, breathe, don't think, listen, believe. Investigators recorded that the letter found in the trash had been torn into small pieces. After reconstructing the text, experts determined that it contained phrases about a new stage and final trust. A forensic examination revealed the presence of several incompatible drugs in the patient's blood. One of them was a strong sedative that was not part of the prescribed course. Pressure marks were found on the patient's arms and neck, inconsistent with an accidental fall. The report noted that death occurred between midnight and 3 a.m. on April 8th. Police questioned the motel manager. He reported that at approximately 10 p.m., a dark-colored car with no license plates pulled up to the building. The driver did not enter, but remained in the parking lot for about an hour. The license plate could not be obtained, but the description matched a car registered to Dr. Rosamond's assistant. In Ellis's apartment, which investigators entered 3 days later, they found an open notebook with notes from the past few weeks. It detailed instructions regarding sleep, eating, breathing, and silence. The final lines were written in a different handwriting. Forensic experts confirmed it was Rosamond's. The psychologist's office was searched without resistance. Drafts of documents detailing a method of emotional synchronization through stress were found on his computer. He claimed he was working on a scientific article and had nothing to do with the patient's disappearance. Several personal items belonging to the woman, earrings, bracelets, and notes with names, were found in his office. All the items were neatly folded in a box labeled Archive. The investigation revealed that Ellis had called him 5 times the day before her death. He didn't answer any of them. He later explained that he was out of town attending a seminar. A background check revealed that on the day of her death, he withdrew a large sum of cash and that his cell phone had been turned off for almost 12 hours. 2 days after the discovery of her body, he gave his first interview to a local television station. His speech was calm, without emotion. He said that Ellis's death was a professional tragedy for him and that she had ceased to distinguish between her medical treatment and her personal life. The investigation was unable to prove the psychologist's direct involvement in the murder. However, the examination confirmed that his therapeutic methods bore the hallmarks of coercive psychological influence. The reports described the method as emotional subordination induced by suggestion. Room 18 at the motel was locked. The owner hadn't rented it out for several months. The building was later sold, and the walls were repainted, but the old stain on the carpet remained hidden under the new carpet. Police records list the case as unfinished, with a note to re-examine it if new evidence emerges. Thus ended 3 days, during which the young woman followed every instruction, believing it was a cure, and no one had time to tell her that her trust had become part of someone else's experiment. Following Elisa Merwin's death, the investigation lasted nearly a year. Despite the public outcry, there was still insufficient evidence for a conviction. Dr. Daniel Roseman continued to insist that his patient's death was a tragic case of suicidal regression. He invoked scientific jargon, spoke confidently, and cited studies, but was unable to explain the origin of the drugs found in her blood. The professional community distanced itself from him. The Canadian Association of Psychotherapists suspended his license pending the outcome of a review. Official documents cited violations of therapist-client boundaries, emotional manipulation, and the use of hypnosis without consent. However, no direct evidence linking him to the patient's death was presented. A media campaign dubbed Trust Syndrome began. Journalists reported on dozens of women who claimed to have undergone therapy with Roseman and experienced similar feelings of dependence. Several agreed to testify, but their stories were limited to hints and emotional descriptions. None of them formally proved abuse. All cases were described as voluntary interactions in the therapeutic process. The investigation revealed that he worked without an assistant, without video surveillance, without medical records. His practice was built on trust, and trust leaves no trace. He never raised his voice, made threats, or used physical force. Everything that happened depended on the patient's faith in his words. Experts would later write that this was a rare form of control, based not on fear, but on authority. Copies of letters she sent him a month before her death were found in Ellis's house. Each letter conveyed a sense of dependency, requests, confessions, reports. In one, she wrote that she was afraid to live without his guidance. For the investigators, this confirmed psychological subordination, but not a criminal offense. The family sought a new investigation. The girl's mother gave an interview in which she spoke of doctors who play with souls. Public debate about ethical standards in psychotherapy began. Canada adopted new guidelines for working with vulnerable patients, requiring recording of sessions, written consent for the use of hypnotherapy, and mandatory reports after each consultation. Roseman himself left Toronto. There was no news of him for several years. It was later discovered that he was running a private online practice under a different name, consulting with clients from abroad. His website contained no photos, only quotes about restoring trust through pain. The case of Elisa Merwin has become a byword for lethal, manipulative addiction. No court ever found him guilty, but in professional circles, he became a symbol of broken ethics. Psychologists and journalists discuss the case as an example of how thin the line between assistance and control can be. Ellis's mother still keeps her diaries. The last entry, written the day before her death, contains a few words. "He said, 'I'm free now.' I believe it." Officially, the case is closed, but within the professional community, it remains a reminder. Trust can be stronger than fear, but it is precisely through trust that crimes that leave no trace are most often committed. Thus ended the story of the girl who came for salvation to the man she considered a cure, and thus began the long shadow that hangs over those who build their power on someone else's faith.